Hi guys. Sometimes I get questions from students asking me what the difference is between an objective and a goal, or what the difference is between a vision versus a mission. So I thought I'd put together this lecture to delineate some of these terms that seem quite similar, but are actually a little bit different. Now, sometimes these terms are easily confused because they should work together, and therefore there will be a bit of blurring. But there is a point in understanding each concept for its own individual, value. And so I'm hoping that this lecture will be able to help tease apart some of those similarities, but at the same time, see how they all fit together towards achieving business success. To help look at the differences between some key terms, I've come up with this table. At the very top of the table, we have very abstract, high elevation type concepts. These are concepts that you can imagine the senior executive team would get together and think about, high level ideas to do with the company. As we move down to the second row, we have things that are a little bit more actionable. And at the very bottom of the table, we have concepts that are very concrete or very tangible. And you can actually, measure or account for in some way. As we move from left to right, we have concepts that are very broad to begin with, and then they become much more specific. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through these concepts here. So if we start at the very top left, we'll have concepts like vision. So the corporate vision is something that the senior executive team get together and they sort of imagine what they would like the company to be like in a few years' time. So it's future looking. Ideally, it's aspirational. It should be distinct, so each vision should be different across the different companies, but at the same time, it's quite abstract, right? You can't really grab a vision. Now, something that's a little bit more specific than a vision is a mission. So we've gone from something that's aspirational to something that is motivational. So mission is motivational. It's what the company does and for whom, whereas a vision is where the company wants to be. Right, so we've gone vision, mission, and then we become even more specific when we start to talk about things like purpose. So a purpose is the reason for existence, why the company does what it does. And so you can see how these concepts are very much blurry because they're all aligned in some way, but they're also distinct in their own right. Now the most specific high-level concept is values. So values are the moral compass of a company. It's a moral compass that's enacted through principles that hopefully everyone within that company agrees on, from the CEO right down to the worker or the laborer. And ideally, all of these concepts here help to align the corporate culture, align the company in some way so that they're all on the same page. And if they do that job well, then hopefully external stakeholders, such as end consumers or customers, will also agree on these high-level concepts. They'll agree with the vision of where the company wants to be. They'll agree with the values and the principles by which that company act. And then you get loyal customers, right? So the next row down is slightly more tangible. So now we're getting into action, whereas that uppermost row looked at alignment, the second row looks at action. And so before you act, you need to think about what you're going to do. And so a personal favorite of mine is strategy. I define strategy as a decision-making framework that takes into account resources, tactics, all within competitive uncertainty, and all with the purpose of achieving some sort of outcome or goal. Right, so a strategy is a decision-making framework. So it is going to be slightly broader. If we want to make it more specific, then we start to look at things called plans. So a plan, unlike a strategy, is much more, specific in what it's hoping to do. It is mapping out or providing a blueprint by which people can follow in order to see how the strategy is actually going to happen. And so within this plan, you'll have things like tactics, which are the actions that need to be executed in order to achieve that strategy. So, a good example of a tactic that I use in my advertising class is something like, having a billboard or launching a bus shelter ad, right? So these are tactics that you do that will fit somewhere on this plan, but the plan would have been put together based on a higher level sort of decision-making framework that hopes to achieve some sort of desired outcome or goal. Now, in executing these tactics, which are mapped out on this plan, which is your blueprint, there will be costs associated with each tactic. So it's going to cost something to have a billboard. It's going to cost something to have a bus shelter ad. And so the budget is the most specific concept within this row, which looks at action. Because a budget basically shows the resources you have and where these resources will be allocated, typically in numerical form, signified by a dollar amount. So the budget will show you how much you've got to work with and where these resources go in terms of money, usually, the specific tactics that they will fund. All of this fits together within a plan, and the plan exists because of the decision-making framework, the thinking that has happened in order to achieve a certain goal, which hopefully is in line with the vision, the mission, and the purpose and the values of the company. So this middle row was all about action, and therefore the bottom row is about assessment. So we've gone from high-level abstract concepts down through to something more tangible, and now at this very bottom row, it is the most concrete level of concepts. So we start with something that is still broad and long-term, like goals, but they are much more tangible than something such as a vision and something such as a strategy, right? So goals are desired outcomes. They're broad, and they can be long range. Now, they can be mid-range, they can be short-range goals. So we talk about having short-term goals and mid-term goals and long-term goals. For the purposes of this discussion, I want you to think of goals as slightly more broad and slightly longer term, because in order to achieve those broad goals, you'll need to set more specific objectives. And when we talk about objectives, we talk about SMART objectives. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely or timed. And so the time range obviously becomes far more accountable at this stage, far more specific. So an example of a goal could be, I want to get fit. The objectives might be, I want to have improved cardio, I want to lose weight, I want to reduce my blood pressure, right? And so you can set parameters around those based on those SMART objectives. Now, getting even more specific are deliverables. So these are things that you actually want to show for the efforts in order to prove that you've achieved these objectives on your way towards attaining that goal. So deliverables sometimes are also thought of as a little bit more client-centric. So if you imagine there's a group working on a project, there's a client they're serving. So a deliverable might be something like, okay, we're going to deliver on a website by this date, or we're going to deliver on a campaign pitch by this date. Right? And so it's something that's a little bit more mid-range. The time is far more accountable. The project team will have to deliver on something. If we use the example of getting fit, it could be like, I want to be able to run a half marathon in 6 months' time. So then that means you have something to show for it, which would then help you tick off the objectives that you set in order to achieve the goal at that broad level. KPIs and targets are the most specific aspect of this bottom rung of assessment. So KPIs, or key performance indicators, are sometimes used interchangeably with targets. The difference between a target and a KPI is that a target is like a bullseye. So it's something you're specifically aiming for. It could be a specific time on your half marathon, right? Whereas a KPI will track your progress towards that. So it could be take the form of timing that if you're running, other sort of mock marathons before that, or it could be something like, running 5Ks first, and then 10Ks a few weeks later, and then 20Ks a month later, right? And so KPIs will track your performance towards achieving a target. So a target can be a KPI, but a KPI can be slightly different from a target as well, right? A target is more of that bullseye, but they all work together nonetheless. That as you achieve these KPIs, you should be heading towards a target, and then you'll have something to show for it, which is a deliverable, which then helps you say you've ticked off these objectives, and then that's the journey towards the goal. And so this bottom level of assessment shows that in a very concrete way. So just to summarize, we have very abstract ideas at the top, and they get more concrete or more tangible as we go down the table. And we have quite broad goals from the right, and as you move to the left, they become far more specific. And if you do all of these things correctly, then that should give you business success. Now, there is blurriness between some of these concepts still, and as I mentioned in the previous slide, this makes sense because all of it should be working together anyway. And so there should be a little bit of blurry as you move from a vision to a mission to a purpose. But in saying that, I think it's also useful to be able to delineate between these different terms. Otherwise, what's the point of having them? So I hope you found that useful. See you guys next time.